I did not say a word. I did not reach across the table. I did not let my face do anything that would give me away. I just picked up my wine glass, took one slow sip, and looked at my son-in-law over the rim. He had no idea what he had just done. My daughter's name is Audrey. She was born on a Thursday in late October, during a snowstorm that knocked out the power on our street for 6 hours. The nurses used flashlights. I remember thinking, even then, that this child arrived on her own terms, in her own weather, and that nothing about her would ever be small. She grew up that way, loud opinions at the dinner table. Captain of her high school debate team. The kind of girl who corrected her teachers, politely, always with a smile, but still. She studied environmental law at Dalhousie, graduated near the top of her class, and moved to Ottawa for a position with a firm that did work she actually believed in. I was proud of her in the way that fills up your chest and stays there. I am a retired family court judge. I spent 31 years in that courtroom. I have heard things that would make most people leave the room. I learned over decades how to read a situation before anyone had finished their first sentence. You develop a kind of stillness. Not coldness. Stillness. There is a difference. My husband passed 11 years ago. It has been me and Audrey since then, in the way that two people become each other's steadiest point without meaning to. We talked every Sunday. She came home to Halifax for Christmas and at least one long weekend in the summer. That was our rhythm, and it held. Then she met him. His name is Troy. And I want to be precise about this, because precision matters. Troy did not seem like anything to worry about at first. He was tall, well-dressed, worked in commercial real estate in Ottawa. He laughed easily. He pulled out Audrey's chair. He called me Mrs. Calloway, until I told him 3 times to call me by my first name, and even then, he kept doing it, which I eventually decided was charming rather than odd. They dated for about a year before she told me she was in love with him. I asked her the things a mother asks. Was he kind to her? Did he listen? Did she feel like herself around him? She said yes to all of it. She was glowing when she said it. I believed her, because why wouldn't I? The first time I noticed something off, I was visiting Ottawa. It was March, one of those gray weeks when the cold has gone on too long, and everyone in the city looks slightly defeated. Audrey had just been promoted, junior partner. It was a big deal. She had worked brutal hours for it, and I had flown in specifically to take her out and celebrate. We were getting ready to leave the apartment when Troy said, casually, the way you comment on the weather, that the restaurant she had chosen was a little much, don't you think, for a Tuesday? It was a Friday. Audrey looked at the floor for half a second. Then she looked up and said, You're right, maybe somewhere more casual. I watched that happen. I filed it. The restaurant she'd originally chosen had been her favorite since law school. She had mentioned it to me on the phone twice in the weeks before my visit. We ended up at a chain near their building that Troy liked. He ordered for both of them without asking her what she wanted. When the food came, he told the server the fries were cold. They were not cold. I flew home 2 days later and sat in my kitchen for a long time before I called anyone. Over the following months, the calls with Audrey changed. Not dramatically. She still called on Sundays, still asked about the garden, still sent me photos of the waterway near their building in autumn. But somewhere in the texture of it, something had shifted. She stopped talking about work as much. When I asked about her cases, she'd say, "It's going fine," and move on. She'd been the kind of person who could spend 40 minutes describing a legal argument that excited her. That person started disappearing from our Sunday calls, slowly enough that I kept hoping I was wrong. She also started qualifying herself. I don't know, maybe I'm overthinking it. Troy says I get too emotional about work stuff. He's probably right that I take things too personally. These little additions, tucked into sentences, I recognize the pattern. I had seen it in my courtroom more times than I can count. I said nothing yet. That was hard. But I have learned in 31 years that timing is everything. They got engaged in November. She called me right after, and I could hear that she was happy, genuinely, not performed. And I held on to that. I told her I was thrilled. I meant part of it. His family was from the Okanagan. His parents were warm people, a bit formal, who brought wine and complimented the house when they visited. His sister, Melissa, was another matter. Melissa was 38, divorced 2 years after a short marriage she never explained, and she had a great deal to say about what made a marriage work. She inserted herself into Audrey and Troy's life in the way that some people do, not asking, just arriving. She had opinions about the apartment, about how Audrey dressed, about whether Audrey's job left her available enough for Troy. She said things like this with a smile, framed as concern. Audrey laughed them off, or tried to. I could see, when they were in the same room, how Audrey held herself differently around Melissa. Smaller, more careful. Melissa thought I was a sweet old woman from Halifax who made good shortbread. That was fine with me. The birthday dinner was in late August, the summer before the wedding. Audrey was turning 34. She had chosen a restaurant in the Byward Market, a place with exposed brick and a menu that changed seasonally, the kind of spot she would have chosen for herself on her best day. She seemed lighter that evening when we arrived. She was wearing a blue dress she'd bought in Montreal, and she'd done something with her hair that I remember thinking looked like her, like the version of her I recognized. There were 7 of us at the table. Me, Troy, Melissa, 2 of Audrey's friends from law school, a couple named Greta and Dev, and a colleague of Troy's whose name I no longer think about. We ordered drinks. The menus came. Audrey was looking at hers, saying something to Greta about the duck confit, and Troy leaned over and said, quietly, but not quietly enough, "Just get the salmon. You always agonize over menus, and then you're not happy with what you order anyway." Audrey's face did something small and quick that she covered immediately. "You're probably right," she said, and Melissa across the table smiled and said, "Some women just need a little guidance with decisions. Nothing wrong with that." She laughed when she said it, just lightly, like it was a joke. Greta looked at her water glass. Dev looked at me. Troy picked up his menu. I set down my fork. I had not been using it yet, but I set it down anyway, because I needed my hands to be still, and that was the clearest way to make them so. I excused myself, told them I was going to the washroom, walked down the hall past the bar, found the quietest corner near the coat check, and made one phone call. The call was to a colleague. A former colleague, technically. A man I had worked alongside for many years who now practiced family law privately in Ottawa, and who owed me, in the way that people who have helped each other for decades sometimes quietly owe each other, a great deal. I told him what I was watching. I asked him to start keeping his calendar clear. I went back to the table. I ordered the duck confit. I toasted my daughter and told her she was one of the finest people I had ever known, and I meant every syllable, and I watched Troy's jaw do something tight and small when I said it. After that evening, I started paying closer attention. Careful attention. The kind I used to pay in court when I knew something was underneath the surface but hadn't yet come up for air. I visited Ottawa twice more that fall, each time staying in a hotel nearby so that I could see Audrey without the shape of Troy's apartment around us. We went for walks, long ones, the way we used to when she was younger, and working through something she didn't have words for yet. I let her talk without redirecting. I asked questions only when she paused. What came out was gradual, not in a single confession. She said she had started keeping a mad money account. A small checking account Troy didn't know about, because he had started managing their joint finances in a way that made her feel she needed to ask permission for purchases. Not large ones. Any of them. She had bought herself a birthday gift with her own salary and felt guilty about it for a week before telling him. He had asked to see the receipt. She told me this the way you tell someone a thing you've been carrying too long. A little embarrassed, a little relieved, watching my face to see if you've said something wrong. I kept my face the way I learned to keep it in my courtroom. Steady, present. Not giving away what I was already calculating. She told me, on the third walk, about a night in February. They had argued. About what? She had already half forgotten. And he had grabbed her by the upper arm hard enough to leave a mark. He'd apologized immediately. Said it would never happen again. She'd believed him. Or she'd told herself she believed him. But she had started noticing that she flinched sometimes when he moved suddenly. She'd noticed herself noticing, and that had frightened her more than the flinching itself. That was when I stopped calculating and started moving. I asked her if she had told anyone else. She hadn't. I asked her if she had documented anything. She hadn't thought to. I told her gently what I would have told anyone sitting across from me in those early years on the bench. That documentation is protection, and protection starts before you think you need it. We sat on a bench near the Rideau River for a long time after that. I want to be honest about something. I was frightened. Not in the way that shows. I am past the age where fear shows on my face without my permission. But inside, yes. This was my daughter. This was the person I had sat beside in a hospital room during a blackout. This was the girl who had stood in my kitchen at 17 explaining to me why a particular Supreme Court decision was wrong and being mostly right about it. The idea that she had been moving through her days with a bruise under her sleeve and hadn't called me was something I had to sit with, quietly, and not turn into something that was about me. It wasn't about me. It was about her and what she needed and how quickly I could be useful without pushing her in a direction she hadn't chosen yet. I did not tell her what to do. That was the hardest thing I have ever done, and I have done hard things. I asked her what she wanted, not what she thought she should want. Not what seemed practical, what she wanted. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I want to feel like myself again. I don't remember when I stopped." I put my arm around her, and we sat there until it got cold. Over the next 6 weeks, I worked. Quietly, methodically, the way I have always worked when the stakes are high. My colleague in Ottawa, I will call him a friend, because that is what he is, helped Audrey understand what her options looked like practically. She was not yet married, which mattered. They had a joint lease. She had her own salary, her own professional standing, and now, as we put it in place, her own documentation. She had photographs of the bruise. She had screenshots of text exchanges where he had monitored her spending, asked for access to her work calendar, told her that her emotions made her unreliable at her own job. She had a dated note from her own family doctor who had asked a routine question at an appointment and received an honest answer for the first time. Troy and Melissa did not know any of this was happening. Troy, in fact, spent those 6 weeks continuing to be charming on the surface, calling me on Audrey's phone sometimes when they visited, asking about my garden, telling me he hoped I knew I was always welcome in their home. Melissa sent me a text through Audrey asking for my shortbread recipe. I sent her the recipe. It was a good one. She didn't deserve it. The day Audrey told him she was ending the engagement, I was in Halifax. She had asked me not to be there in person. She needed to do it herself, she said, and I understood that completely. She called me 30 minutes after. She had been calm. He had not. His sister had been there, at his request, which told me he had known something was coming. That detail mattered, and I noted it. Within the week, the lawyers had done what lawyers do. The lease was handled cleanly. Audrey had already arranged to stay with Greta for the month until she could secure her own apartment. She walked out of that place with her clothes, her files, her cat, and herself. She came home to Halifax for 2 weeks in December. We made soup and walked on the waterfront and watched films in the evenings and did not talk about him any more than necessary. On the last night before she flew back to Ottawa, we sat at the kitchen table with tea and she said, "I can't believe I didn't see it coming." I told her that was the point. That's what that kind of person does. They are careful in the beginning. They choose people who are confident and intelligent and capable because those are the people who take longer to believe it's happening to them. "You saw it," she said. "I had 31 years of practice," I told her. "And I'm your mother. I've been watching you since before you had words." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What did you do?" "That night at dinner, when you went to the washroom." I told her. She looked at me for a long time. "You had already started," she said. It wasn't a question. "I had already started," I said. She shook her head, and then she laughed. A real one, the kind that starts in the chest, and said, "He had no idea who he was dealing with." No, he did not. She is back in Ottawa now. She moved into her own apartment in January, a place with high ceilings and a window in the kitchen that looks out over a courtyard. She has taken on a new case she's excited about. Environmental regulation, the kind of work that used to fill 40 minutes of our Sunday calls. It is filling 40 minutes again. She calls every Sunday. If you are watching this and something in it felt familiar, the way someone you love has started getting smaller, the way they qualify themselves now when they didn't used to, the way they check before they speak. I want to say something directly to you. You are not overreacting. You are not interfering. A parent's instinct is not a feeling to argue yourself out of, neither is a friend's or a sibling's. The people who can see it are often the ones standing just outside the frame, and sometimes that distance is exactly what makes them useful. Document. Ask questions. Wait for readiness, but do not wait so long that you mistake patience for permission. My daughter is 34 years old and she is sleeping well again. That is everything. What does this story bring up for you? And for those listening from across Canada and beyond, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from.